Me, or am I going to introduce you? And it's like, you know what? No one knows me better than me, and no one knows you better than you.
Hope so.
So if you could give everybody a quick bio, and
Great.
We'll get the ball rolling.
Good, thanks, Chris. Hans Milberger, I'm Senior Director of Design and Construction at Pieology Pizzeria. Prior to that, I spent the beginning of my career in 13 years for the commercial general contractors, DPR Swinnerton, and then made my jump over to the owner's side of the triangle, as well as retail with Apple. In-house for a couple of years, and then in the restaurant world, Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, Nectar Juice Bar, and now Pieology for the last 2 years. So happy to be here.
Okay. And I'm Terry Long. I'm with Brinker International. I'm their Senior Director of Property Development, Design, and Architecture. I've been with them approximately 13 years. Prior to that, I did a long stint in the Southeast. I worked for Ruby Tuesday for a number of years, developed all of their concepts, worked for Chick-fil-A. 1 year, my shortest job ever, 1 year and 1 day, was with WD Partners. And then I was able to come on and be with Brinker International. And happy to be there and happy to be here. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Juliana Strieff. I'm the retail design lead for McDonald's concept and development for all of our US projects. Been with United States, with McDonald's US for about 6 years, and have been doing restaurant development, historic building redevelopment for about 12 years now. So very excited to be here.
Hi everybody, James Damian, Chairman of the Board of Buffalo Wild Wings, and I have a design thinking consultancy that helps boards and leadership teams think differently about their business model, integrating the EQ with the IQ.
Thank you. And again, Chris Collins with Environment. We are a design and architecture firm in Columbus, Ohio. Any other Buckeyes in the room? OH. Yeah, always wanted to do that. Sorry, it's one of those annoying things that we do in Ohio. You can go anywhere. Environment is very passionate about brands, so it's wonderful to be here and talk to everybody about their brand. Everybody has a story to tell, and we enjoy doing that. And the reason we like doing that is simply because we realize as designers and architects, we have a very limited sort of bandwidth or interaction with each one of our brands and their development. So concept to scale is very, very relevant to us. You know, we don't pick the sites, we don't construct them. So we feel that having that knowledge, you know, and understanding those brands really allows us to contribute as much as we can to those brands and contribute to the success. Our tagline is collaboration plus creation. And, you know, we thought about that and it's like, well, is it creation? It's like, well, it's not creation for creation's sake. And frankly, without really, really comprehensive and effective collaboration, there's no way, collaboration, there's no way that the creation is going to happen appropriately, or it's not going to be as successful as it could be. So that really helps us segue into this session from concept to scale. So starting off with Juliana, you know, speaking of collaboration, one of her comments, and we've got 4 themes, general themes, because this is so broad, and frankly, everybody here deals with this on a daily basis, if not continual basis. So we don't want to do a typical panel session where, you know, we do moderator curated or questions and then save the Q&A till the end. We'd really like to make it interactive, especially since there was a party last night. We want to keep everybody engaged. So anyway, we do want to start off with Juliana. I know she had something to talk about, controlling the messaging. Is your theme?
It is. So when we first started discussing, you know, what's the most critical element from taking a great design concept, because we all do great design concepts, right? We don't ever start with crappy design concepts, but they sometimes turn into that. I think that one of the things that has really proven successful for me and for our teams at McDonald's is we're very protective about the message around the design concept. So we, on our team, of course McDonald's has a huge marketing department, big PR department, creative services department, but we keep our own people because we realize the value in ensuring that the initial design ensuring that it gets messaged properly. So we were talking about this at lunch the other day. I feel that 10% of my job is figuring out what's the real problem that we're solving. Another 10% is creating that design, getting that solution. But that's only 20%. 80% of the job is really communicating it well. And as you can imagine, with a company as large as McDonald's, we've got I've got a lot of layers of red tape internally before we even get to the CEO, the president, the board, our owner-operators who frankly have the big bag of money I'm asking them to open up and drop a couple million on a restaurant. It's a lot of different layers, and if we are very careful about how we control that messaging and why design is important and why the value of the pieces I'm asking them to spend money on is important, we find that we're a lot more successful in getting an end product that's in a space that's a lot closer to what we had in mind when we began.
Yeah, and frankly, as architects, we understand, and designers, we'll spend as much money as we can.
Yes, we will.
Unless you tell us really what that limit is, so it's good to have a target. Anybody here want to add anything?
I'll add into that. I think the messaging and the communication strategy is really probably the most important thing that you can spend time on. Because if you don't do the work on the front end of it, and if you don't engage the C-level team, the CEO, and the board, things can go south really, really quickly. And I can't impress enough about this because a lot of companies just want to jump to design. Oh, we need a new concept. And you go there first, and you're not armed with the unmet needs of the customer. You haven't done your homework with why this is really important to the enterprise. And you haven't engaged the board. And let's face it, I mean, one of the strategic pillars of the board is the strategic business plan that's looking out for the long-term vision of the company. And along with that, they're in charge of approving the capital deployment in a lot of cases. Now, if you're heavily weighted on franchising versus wholly owned, you still are responsible, the core business is still responsible for paving the way on what's next. And if that conversation is not happening at the board level with the partnership of the CEO team, I can tell you whatever concept you decide to do is probably going to be filled with a lot of landmines. Because once you've made that call and you're going down the rail station on your process, what you thought was going to be the panacea that's not armed with all of these essential tools fails miserably at the point of execution. So I can't impress you with enough that the managers and the directors of a company have got to be able to manage up as well as manage down.
Getting franchisees involved early is key too. I mean, you can do all you want in a vacuum. We're 25% corporate owned, 75% franchise, and we found out the hard way sometimes, well, this isn't that big of an initiative, it's easy to roll out. There's franchisees come from all different spaces, they all have a different opinion, they're gonna push back on a lot of things, hopefully not just for the sake of pushing back, but with good constructive feedback. So we found having franchise advisory council, some of the larger franchise holders that are able to buy in and contribute to the vision and contribute to some of the things we're putting out there, we get much better buy-in, and they're able to bang the drum for other franchisees to buy in and make that transition much easier when it's time to roll it out.
You also have a lot more credibility too, because you're not in the ivory tower designing. You're taking that input.
And we do the same thing. We're 70-30, 70% corporate owned, but we'll elect to partner with one of our larger franchisees, and we'll have them go out and do a reimage or do a new building to gain that credibility with our franchisees.
You know, with that said, how often do you have to really show the metrics to your franchise community to get them on board? I mean, I realize there's franchise agreements, but you know, there's still pushback and reluctance to wait until the last possible second to implement, if that's the, you know.
That's the beauty of having some corporate owned, is to do it yourself first. So walk the walk first and say, hey, listen, here are the metrics. Here's what it produced in 6 months or a year. And then this is how we'd like you to roll it. Here's what we learned. We backed off on this. We added a little bit more here. So you actually give those learnings to them, and it just makes it much easier to actually roll out.
Well, in 2010, we actually started a Reimage program, and Chili's had never, ever re-imaged the entire fleet. But we set out and said, we're going to touch every restaurant, all 930 of them, and our franchisees were like, right, you know. They were like, you haven't completed one yet. Are you going to really do this? So we rolled through it. Some of the franchisees elected to do it, and the others are like, okay, we're going to do the next one now that you've done this one. And so it'll be interesting for us.
Is there anybody here a majority franchise? How do you handle it?
We are starting, right now we're working on the strategy of, we're going from full versus push. But I've worked previously in situations where, where the franchisee took the lead, really kind of gained status within the franchise community. But I've also been in situations where we did it simultaneously, so we were working on projects with the franchisee at the same time that we were doing our own, and so there was a lot of collaboration, and we were very transparent in what that collaboration was, and also the cost for each. And then we would adopt best practices from each project.
I would imagine it breaks down to a lot of past trust as well, as well as metrics.
That is such a great point that you're bringing up. We have identified a group of what we like to call Evangelist Operators. And, you know, they're our test group, but we realize that, you know, they'll be our test lab for free, so to speak. And if it's successful, they're going to spread the word to everybody under the sun. You know, we partner with very influential operators. Very careful to do that. You know, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that, though. If we come out with some terrible design, you know, they're going to tell everybody too, so we need to, you know, back that up. But that's, yeah, you can't underscore the importance of working with key operators.
Yes, sir.
So we're 100% franchise. We have a core of 12 stores that the head of the company, the owner of the company owns, which gives us a framework for experimentation, as you guys have discussed. So we rolled out the remodel, which we're just completing after a 3-year program. We're just completing in all our stores. Rolled it out in this stores first. First ones are a couple rocky experiences, as you can imagine. We got it done straight up in the 3rd store, and then we'll roll out across the dozen stores we had. Then we had all that videotaped and tracked all the consumer responses and the differentials in sales and in performance. And then we rolled all that out, including the equipment and the demonstration materials and everything else, at our annual meeting. So they could see the store construction, they could see the beginning and after, and then we showed them the metrics of the process. And we actually had contractors on site at the vendor show, along with all the equipment that franchisees physically touch and materials that we can touch. And that seemed to be the cleanest path to get the biggest jump. And that actually caused a huge jump. We did more than a third of the franchises committed in the next couple of months. Once their sales started going up and we were able to track literally regions that had been redone, they became very enthusiastic reporters to the other franchises.
Right.
We've done a similar thing. We're getting ready to roll out another Reimage program. it's kind of like doing the Golden Gate Bridge. When they're done painting it, it's time to start over, and that's true for us with 930 restaurants. So we actually had our franchisees come in several months back, and we unveiled what the new Reimage was going to look like, and it was very welcomed because, like I mentioned before, a lot of them didn't do the previous Reimage. And so to get their buy-in and to get some of them already started on that program was absolutely huge. Builds instant credibility.
I guess that's true in the restaurant industry. The paint never dries.
That's true.
So, I think there was one other person back there on the franchise side.
Yeah, we do the same thing. We involve our franchisees in all tests and get their input. From a remodel perspective, we were the first to try a complete reimage that was not just paint and decor. It was really a revamp of the menu and a lot of elements. We had huge success. So now they're joining in on the remodel as well. If they sign up for a renewal of 5 years or more, then we're required to do.
Great. Yeah, some leverage.
Speaking of, we're talking a lot about challenges and obstacles. And I know James had as we were speaking before, had some initial perspective or additional perspective on not only the boardroom, but just the obstacles that happen and why things die before perhaps we as the development community ever see it. So if you could elaborate on that maybe a little bit.
Yeah, the hardest thing in a big organization is to get an idea to the marketplace. And a lot of these things end up on the cutting room floor. And I think that the best way to de-risk all of it is to really have what I call an HTV process, where you go into this idea that we need to hit refresh or we need to get the next generation of stores out in the marketplace. You enter it with a hypothesis. And that hypothesis needs to carry with it the voice of the franchisees, the voice of the customer has got to be at the center of it. And the company's got to be all in on it. And the hypothesis then gets formed. And I believe that the design capability is on the hook in organizations to do this. Why? The design capability has to work horizontally across the company in order to gather all of these inputs. And the more that that is done, the chances of you having a better model are greater because you're de-risking it and making sure that the multiple points of view are all entered in to this repository called design. And the design capability has got to be on the hook for facilitating it through the hypothesis to get it tested. Now, in a company that's got, a lot of franchisees and a lot of wholly owned, you want to test these ideas within both and put them up against control stores. And again, that furthers the process, it de-risks it, and you gather the learnings without betting the farm. And in so doing, you're verifying it and you're validating it. And then it goes through another iteration where you might further it through more markets. We did a Stadia concept a few years ago, and we did it with a franchisee that was based in Cincinnati. They had a nice pool of stores to work with, and they were willing to do it. And then we did it with wholly owned entities in the California market. And then it kind of, as we learned, we grew. And then that gave us the confidence that, one, the customer loved it. There were a lot of benefits. We were seeing incremental lifts that were well beyond the expectations the more that we did this exercise. And I think that for those of you that may not have it or outsource design, design can be that facilitator and own that process so that when you do get to the place where you're ready to say, this is going to go forward and we're going to go backward with it, you have the confidence and you're armed with the right information, and you're doing a benefit for the shareholders in the end because you're spending their capital wisely.
That's pretty much what we do. We'll come up with an approved plan from the C-suite. Having presented it to them, then we'll go out and we'll pick 1 or 2, maybe 3 restaurants. We'll go ahead and initiate it. We'll give it a run time. We'll get our insights group to go out and get feedback on the guests. What do they like? What do they give us credit for? What do they not like? And then what we'll do is we'll tweak it based on that. And then we may go out and we may pick 15 to 20 other restaurants, and we may actually pick a small DMA so that we can now go ahead and get our marketing team more involved, our culinary team more involved. We can get everyone involved in it, some training, et cetera, and we get the media behind it, and then we put it up against control restaurants, and we see what those metrics are.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any examples of perhaps stakeholder meetings where that sort of vetting has taken place before bricks and mortar are ever affected? Or is it really just coming straight to idea to let's do one, let's execute it, and then gather the metrics? I think you've got one on internal.
I do.
mock-ups.
So a couple examples, doing constructability analysis in mock. I'm a contractor. I dug ditches for 5 years before I went to college to study construction. Realized I didn't want to do that all my life. So I said, I better get an education and get the other side of the shovel. So I always look at things from how it goes together and how it's built. So one example was with Apple with limitless funds, basically, and the other with Pieology, where we need to do things a little bit smarter. We're much smaller, and we have franchisees to please as well. So the Apple example, who remembers the Apple mini store? Yeah, not very many hands. There were 7 of them built. I got involved in it when we were literally moving around pieces of plywood on casters to determine the size and shape of the store, all the way through the simultaneously opening of 7 stores all at the same day. And that was done with a mock-up in the offices. We had a full Apple store inside Apple where we were able to build everything, and a lot of side benefits came from that, because by having a mock-up there in-house, and this gentleman mentioned that he actually set that up. It doesn't have to be done in a space, it can be done temporarily, which you probably did at your franchisee conference. But a lot of the side benefits came from that, as every other department can get in there and see it. And Revit's great and doing fly-throughs, but when you actually see it doesn't have to be an entire restaurant, but just to do an elevation or an equipment layout where they can actually touch it, it makes a huge difference. And in that example, nobody remembers the mini store, but everybody knows now the ubiquitous backlit panels, as well as the stainless steel interior of the stores. That all came from the mini store concept. So unexpected results came from that. On the Pieology side, we don't have a restaurant in our RSC, so we're just use a local restaurant. That's one of our first ones, one of the busiest, and we literally get in there and just make whatever change it might be, a new POS counter, a change in the line, a change in the back of house equipment. We'll implement it there at maybe a couple, have a proving ground, bring trainers in, bring franchisees in, and prove the concept before we try to roll it out, and then do both alpha beta testing and then roll it out to the bigger masses.
I love your example of the mini store, because it's pretty rare when you come to a conference like this and people talk about the failures. Nobody wants to talk about that. We want to talk about how all the projects where we killed it and it looked great and everybody was happy. But there's so much value in failure. We have a show, I guess, internally every year called The Great Unbuilt, 2016, 2015, whatever. And we highlight all of the projects that we've done that never got built. And we do stuff, sometimes it's way out of our control. We'll do a project for Smithsonian, and the project gets defunded on a government level, or it could be a number of things. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you've done a lot of great work that year, even if you haven't built that work. And the next project that you maybe have a very small research timeline, you can poach so many good ideas from these dead projects. We don't talk about that kind of stuff, but we have to celebrate all of the work that we do, even recognizing just because it's not built, it still has a ton of value.
I'd like to add to that. I think that's so very important to build this kind of a capability inside the culture of the organization so that you're not there saying, okay, it's been, let's see, 3 years since our last concept, it's time to do another one. This notion, while I was at Best Buy, we created a thing called the Failure Forum, which is the same thing. But in order to fail fast, you sometimes have to get outside of the big ship. I know because I failed miserably when I first came to Best Buy, trying to integrate new ideas within the big ship. And it's kind of like biology, you know, you have this big organism and you have these new ideas which are cells, and you try and inject the cells into the big organism, and we only found out very fast that the organism spits them out. And that's the culture. It's repelling it. So what we had to do was create incubators outside of the organism so that we could test it and kick the tires. And yeah, we failed a lot, but it's what you learn from failure that helps you take things from those different compartments and coalesce them into maybe a bigger domain that can benefit the core. And that whole process, you've got to be open to the unexpected discoveries that occur from failures within incubators. And I think the message here is that if you don't have incubators and you don't have ideas always in the pipeline, you know, and you just wake up one day and say, you know, 3 years, it's time for a new concept. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? But if you have that in the system and it's embedded into your culture, you're going to become a company that really invests in innovation.
That's a good trend right now. I don't know if everybody's read it, and I forget where I read it now that I'm saying it, but it was about Incubator Kitchens. And, you know, they're out there in a few different cities, several larger cities, and it's really helping startups because they can't afford to have a test kitchen. So they're basically like, hey, we're not really starting our own restaurant, but we'll invite you to come in, collaborate with us, we'll get better food purchasing power, and then they actually stay collaborative. They go off on their own, start their own restaurants. However, they're buying food together. So they're keeping their costs down and trying to remain competitive even though they're one shop. So it really is sort of tremendous to see that effort that's happening on the culinary side. And you know, it's nice to hear that it translates and it's still used in larger corporations that actually have the money to invest to do it in the first place. Does anybody else have test kitchens or any of that?
Yeah, we do. Kitchen idea came to Detroit by virtue of Kid Rock's writing a check, and they built it right at Eastern Market, which if anybody's been to Detroit, it's just really cool juxtaposition of everything you can think of from the farm to the bakery and meat store and everything else. So this cool kitchen allows people who just have an idea to literally go shop Eastern Market, pull cool stuff that they can do, make it in the kitchen, sell it at Eastern Market, see if there's a market for it, and then move on or move up. It's the neatest idea. That's
great.
That's
Very
cool.
cool.
That's way cool.
Very cool.
And you know, for anybody in this room that is thinking, you know, I don't have the means to do something like that, or, you know, don't have a test kitchen or even an incubator, you know, whatever it is, I would say don't wait for permission, even from those above you. We do a lot of guerrilla design work, I guess. Very under the radar, get it to a certain point. You know, things that we know if we brought them to someone, they'd say, that's crazy, don't do that. But we're rolling out a project right now that, you know, I pretty much started that nobody wanted to have anything to do with, and it's just a wild success because I knew I couldn't sell it. And I can sell a lot of stuff, but I knew it just wasn't gonna happen until it got to a certain point. So don't be afraid of, I'm not saying do time theft or anything like that, but you know, there's ways of getting things done besides the normal channels.
It is interesting. I mean, it kind of segues back to culture again, you know, and it's that collaboration piece and not being afraid or being allowed to fail. You know, one of my mentors was actually Wolfgang Dorschlag, so I worked for the Big Red Machine at one time too. And his comment to me is, you can be wrong. just don't be wrong long. And that was it. So it's like, I was very nervous, and I made a few mistakes, and I'm like, I'm gone, it's over. My college career's done, game over. So it was nice to have somebody just say, relax, it's not a big deal. Just don't screw up again. Don't make that mistake again. So, I wonder, as corporations grow, it's like if they really, cultivate that environment where it's okay to fail, just don't do it long, and you see these incubators, and it really does help because, you've got somebody who's really putting it all out there, but, and in many ways they have nothing to lose. It's like, nah, going for it, So it's like losing that entrepreneurial or aggressive spirit is something that I think everybody needs to cling to, especially as things continue to evolve. I think that was something that Michael was talking about yesterday, probably. So anyway, anybody have anything else on that, on the failure piece?
When does pricing come into play? Because we have a lot of beautiful designs and concepts, and we're always 20% of our budget, and we spend a month value engineering $200,000 to $300,000.
I love that question.
Yeah.
Can I answer? Can I
You
start?
go first.
Okay. So we work, the procurement and supply chain group is my best friend. They're like my right arm. We don't do anything without at least getting a feel for, is this tile going to have to ship from Brazil and be 5 weeks late? I can't do it. Can this gorgeous French chair that I want show up on time? We, again, in kind of a covert way, get all those questions answered very early on in the process and try to design it so that it doesn't have to be stripped later on, because then that way I can make the decisions and our team can make the decisions very early instead of putting it in somebody else's hands. The worst thing that can happen, no offense, Hans, is for GC to come in and say, hey, I've got this alternate and it's perfect and it's exactly the same, and it's never exactly the same.
That's right.
Or somebody higher up in the company going in, we don't need this, and just take it out simply because of cost, and go, well, wait a minute, here's what this affects.
Right.
But we follow pretty much the same model. We start to design something, and then we get our supply chain team involved. We get Mike Stone, my counterpart in construction, involved. We start putting all these pieces together. What's the availability? And in this latest reimage that we're starting, we've actually done 2 different test stores. Hey, which one do you like best? This one's got this bar stool, this one's got this furniture, here's this look. And so that's the way we started it. But we actually started at the beginning, and we're very collaborative with not only operations, but our operations team, our supply chain team, and construction.
And you can train your vendors too, so all the people wearing the black neckerchiefs, so you guys can help us out there by not pitching stuff that costs a ton of money and comes from France or wherever. There's a lot of things that can happen upstream. Anticipate ways of doing things less expensively, regionalizing, warehousing, lots of different things the vendors can help a lot with. So that's the one good thing about long-term vendor relationships, is they're committed to your success, and they know if you don't succeed and you get priced out, they're not going to have work either. So it works 2 ways.
When I was at Taco Bell, when we were in the design phase, a lot of times I would have a plan B in the back of my mind. If I can't get this spec that I want, what would be a plan B? So when we had the 3D renderings done, we would have, this is what we want, this is kind of our plan B, 40% less. We'd go in the boardroom with VR goggles and give all the board members VR goggles, which is hilarious to watch. But that really helped us in our flight, because that, they would see the difference that 20% makes. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes it's not. But that decision was made at that level, which makes it a lot easier.
Yep.
Yeah, it's almost like going to a zoning board. You like this?
Yeah. Then you
How
flip the
about
board
this
over.
You can do this one. This is good too.
Yeah. The other thing that we do is when we get ready to start a Reimage program or any rollout, if it's fryers or whatever, we actually put together a large Excel spreadsheet, and we'll go by DMAs. We load it by DMAs. Sometimes we'll do 2, 3, 4 DMAs at a time, because we want to do about 60 restaurants a quarter. So when we develop this large spreadsheet, we know where the furniture needs to be ordered. We know when the color elevations need to be done. We know when all these various things need to be done. We know if we have to have term for a restaurant. So when we're within a DMA, we push all those restaurants with challenges to the bottom of that DMA. But what that also does is we make that spreadsheet available to everybody on the team, everybody from the C-suite all the way down to the suppliers. So they can literally see all the dates, so they know how many units they need. Doesn't matter if it's a light fixture, if it's a chair, if it's a bar stool, if it's bar top material, we send it to everybody. And that not only gains us alignment, but it's also accountability.
I'd like to add something that was discussed earlier about understanding what is the right path to take. And I think that empowering your teams to get as close to the voice of the customer as possible is a better way to sell a board. And some of the questions that have helped me is, and I'll use this example. I was looking at the business and seeing that the majority of people in our stores at the time were mostly men. And I wanted to know why that was. So we asked women. And we captured it on video. And it's interesting when you ask the question, what frustrates you most about this brand? Tell me what you hate. And when the word hate comes up, it unleashes hell at you. And you've got to have that hell unleashed to understand the unmet needs of your audience. And that becomes a gateway. And I remember taking those testimonials from different parts of the country. And there were common themes as to why they hated it. And I shared it with the board. And it was met with incredible silence. And that's when you know you're on to something. Whether it's your C team, your CEO, or an audience with the board, when you can show them, this is what the customers are saying about you, and we created this. Now here's the good news, we can recreate it, but we're going to use their voice. And that is that's your sword and your shield against the naysayers that it costs too much or we shouldn't really be doing this concept or whatever. But if you're armed with the voice of the customer, that's why you're in business in the first place. And you've always got to place them first and foremost.
Anybody want to expand on that? How about focus groups? Everybody involved with focus groups in the audience? I mean, same thing. They can be misleading sometimes from a programming standpoint. You know, the loudest person at the table really can set the tone for that table. So it is interesting to get that feedback and really layer it against the idea and say it's necessary. It's not just good because, well, look at this. Doesn't this look great? And shouldn't it be great and won't it be great? It's no, you're being told that this has to be happening.
Well, for me, it's all about the moderator when you're in a focus group. That moderator has to be strong. That moderator really has to have charge of that group.
Has everybody been involved in that side of the business?
Well, you have to be careful too, I think, with focus groups, or whether it's that or groups internally that are looking through something and saying, okay, the unit cost of this light fixture is X amount, whatever. You, in both situations, can fall into the trap of picking apart a design by how much each individual piece either costs or has impact, and you can't do that. I think it's very important, whether you have an internal design group or whichever designer or architect you're working with, that you understand what the most important elements are and what the whole point of you doing whatever that design is, and you can spend relentlessly on, you know, say a communal table that is the whole focus of the design, and then strip everything else bare, and that's okay. You know, we've got a project right now where it's a design that is meant to be put into lower volume restaurants that can't necessarily afford a full remodel. And, you know, I keep on getting crap from our supply chain people about the pricing of the chairs, because some of the chairs are higher than our unit cost for a normal design. And I tell them, well, I pulled cost out of every other thing so that you wouldn't know, and I'm spending more on this chair so that it doesn't feel like it's the cheap design. It's like you can't nickel and dime and piece things apart without understanding what are you really trying to do with a project. Yeah. And same with focus groups. You know, what is it somebody that just doesn't like blue? You know, gotta take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, we call it potato heading the design.
I like that.
It may not look like, or Frankenstein, you know, whatever thing you can come up with. And those points of view, as it sort of brings us back to that, you know, who should moderate. You know, you've got C-level, you've got focus groups, design and construction, marketing, operations, all those points of view really have to be brought up to the table to really look at those initiatives and whether you can test it internally, externally, mock-ups, what have you, whether it's a virtual test or we're completing an ROI based on a hypothetical before, just to be safe, or whether you've got people that you trust that are your advocates and disciples that are basically your evangelists that are out there just saying, hey, we got to do this, we got to do this, you know. So bringing that together, you know, and I think the last thing that we might have time for is programming, which, you know, all those people come together, they need some sort of cohesion so that it all doesn't just fall off the table after the discussion is over. So I think Terry had something on programming that I think helps with that.
Yeah, for us, it's all about programming. It's everything. And when you use that as your roadmap to go through the process, and if you don't have a good program, you're not going to have a good product. And we will literally have a very collaborative effort on the programming. And as I mentioned before, we'll do a master spreadsheet so we can follow the design through. And the back half of the program for us is not only on the design, but the back half of the program for us is really to get all of our other departments in the company involved in the Reimage. And we'll do that. And the way that we do that is within the process is when we go into a given DMA, we have calls where we get the AD and the RD on the phone. We get all those individuals on the phone. We tell them all the whys about it. We tell them about the marketing support. We go through the whole program with them so they have an understanding of it. And if you really don't start with that, it's very, very difficult to get it accepted. You just can't go into a market and do a Reimage. So it's really important that you have the program for the physical design and all of those attributes, but then you also have to get everybody else on board and within that.
I think it's important as designers and constructors to continually educate the other stakeholders in our organizations about what we do. Everybody says, oh, they just need to build something, throw a sign up in the building. It's not that simple. They need to understand that the sign needs to be approved by the landlord, then it has to go through the local board, then we've got to get it through the permitting, and then they construct it, or you sign your life away and make the sign before it's approved, and you end up with a sign, you end up in the warehouse as a decoration. So I find myself just constantly in these meetings early on getting people on board, just educating them of what not complaining, but educating them of the process, the design process, and what it takes to do mock-ups and have samples brought in and selections, and then what it takes to actually construct something. And people are usually generally interested in it, and conversely, we need to learn what they're doing as well. I think that the sooner you get that collaboration, that trust among apartments, the easier it is to move forward with an initiative.
Well, we really appreciate everybody's time this morning. It's been a really great networking event so far and exhausting at the same time, so I'm sure everybody's needs some coffee as well as everybody else this morning after the luau. But we probably have time for one or two questions.
I think we got
Or
time
maybe
for
we
just
do.
for one more question.
One?
Hey, good morning. Thank you all for being here. My question is, for Pieology Italian street food, we're less than 50 units. So our designer, who's part of our in-house team, you know, he designed the furniture, the raw material being 10-quarter-inch oak. And now we're at a point where we've got to start lowering development costs. So this is a primary area for us. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to approach him, because normally when I start talking about, you know, coming up with an alternative table and chair set or something along those lines, I feel the thunder and I hear the lightning gathering around my head, and it is just not a safe zone for me to go to, but we've got to get there. So I don't have we've got a plan A, there is no plan B. It's kind of like, this is it, this is always what will be. And we're trying to help them to understand it doesn't sell more Pietas, or if it does, or if it doesn't. How do you know that? So I'm just asking really anybody who's got, I'm like desperate for help here. Anybody might have a suggestion, I'd love to hear it.
It sort of is that safe zone, you know, it's hard to say sometimes, and every designer, architect's probably been faced with it at one point. It's like, your baby is not, you're not gonna say your baby is ugly, but your baby's really not that attractive in that photo. You know, and it's hard to tell people that sometimes, and really it has to be said, and you have to have that trust. But a real world example.
Yeah, honestly, what I would do is, and we just did this with some community tables and some other furniture, and I guess I can pitch somebody. We went to Jacoby Furniture and said, hey, here's our idea. Here's what we would like to have, but we can't afford this. You know, I can't do 5-quarter oak or whatever it is. You know, we can't do that. What other wood species, what other alternatives? How can I get to the same color on the wood? Or how can I get the same look, but how can you help us take money out? I literally go back to our suppliers, and they come through time after time for us. Now, sometimes it's not very popular when I go back to the design guys, and I go, hey, I get it, but we can't afford this, you know.
I was getting mad just listening to you ask that question. I was like, ugh.
I'm moving over.
No, I'm kidding. You know, there's two important things that I think would help, as I guess speaking as the designer here. One, give him the big picture. Tell him this is what's happening, this is what we're trying to meet. Let him meet that goal instead of telling him don't tell him we need cheaper wood or different materials. Tell him this is what we want to do overall, and empower him to decide what's the most important piece there. The other thing that's important, you're talking about scaling up. Don't ignore the fact that if you've got 50 now and you're going to do another 50 next year, fitting out 50 restaurants, your stuff should be way cheaper than it was if you're fitting out 2, 3, 5, 10. So start negotiating. Don't leave money on the table. And I don't say gouge people, but it's a tool that you have that you're going to assure supply to somebody for 50 restaurants. Take advantage of that.
I'd go further upstream. And, I don't want it to be an indictment on the individual, but I put this on the onus of management. What is the role of design? It sounds to me like it's, that this person may not be a designer, might be a decorator. And there's a big difference because in decoration, you have these wars of subjectivity and personal taste. And that's not what this is all about. It can't be an argument over, I personally like blue, or I like this texture, or whatever it is. It has to be centered around the question of, what is it that we need it to do? What is the function of this? What's the end use of this? How can it add value? And the designer's role is to ask those questions and to invite you into the process, not to make you feel like you're walking on eggshells every time you ask this person a question. So I would say, do your homework, get the role right, and get the casting right.
Excellent advice. Great comments. unfortunately, we have to tie it up here, but I want to thank you guys for another wonderful conversation here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.